Okay, I've entitled tonight's talk as Perspectives, 4 Common and 1 Uncommon. So a somewhat obscure title. Another possibly more informative title would be Truth or Bust. Okay, so when we look around the world, sort of consider our situation, there are things that can cause concern, right? I mean, we don't even have to be that imaginative to see them, and we can see them on the level of our planet or species. We can see it on the social, cultural level, and we can see it on the individual level. So where we have gotten through our evolution as a species, we have gotten to the point where we have evolved to the point where we now have the power to destroy ourselves. That's where we've gotten to. Over the last, more or less over the last 400 or 500 years. So it's not hard to name some of the possibilities for that destruction, right? I mean, there's nuclear war. We've been living with that for 75 years now. There's the climate change is often mentioned as a good possibility. There's the contamination of our air and water. There's the alteration and degradation of our food supply, depletion of our agricultural soils throughout the world. There's the unintended consequences of artificial intelligence that we have no idea what those would be, but have the potential to do marvelous things and create havoc as well. There's also elimination of species, within this web of life that have consequences that we can't really calculate. Okay, so there's lots of possibilities there. And what we've tended to do is sort of trust science to, ride in like the Lone Ranger and save the day, right? And one of the things that science likes to point to in its defense is, back 50 years or so ago, was the Green Revolution, the ability to manufacture fertilizers, sort of alter the genetics of crops, not genetically modified, but through hybridization, etc., to be able to vastly increase the food supply in the world. And it did that, right? It did that. And one of the results of that is the population increased dramatically over that period of time. Soils were depleted by these artificial fertilizers, and increasing amount of pesticides were needed in order to maintain that level of production. So whereas there can be some scientific successes, often there are unintended consequences that result from that. So it seems like over last, few centuries, there's been a continued divergence between the advancement of science and the social consequences of that advancement. All right, so that's sort of on a species-threatening level or a planetary wide considerations. There's plenty to be concerned about there, and any one of those things would be sufficient to cause the demise of our civilization, much less all of them happening and moving forward at a rapid pace all at the same time. So the other sort of area of consideration is just the social consequences at this time. I mean, there's also plenty to look at there. The degree of emotional involvement and positioning with regard to race or politics or ideologies or nationalities, etc., create the basis for, tensions at the very least, but also basis for to go to war, whether psychologically or physically. And these days it seems to be there's more of a tolerance for a consolidation of power among a few people, a few corporations, let's say, and less consideration for the freedom of a large number of people. So we have that going on. That's at the sort of social, cultural level. And then, of course, there's the personal level as well, which, dealing with the same things that, the Buddha was trying to wrangle with 2,500 years ago, sickness, old age, and death. But he didn't have to, the situation at the time hadn't advanced to the degree that we as a species could basically affect our own destruction. So he didn't have to deal with that. He was looking at it more on a personal level. All right, so here's our situation. So this is not to say that good things don't happen too. I mean, clearly they do. I mean, there is also love in the world and beauty and respect and compassion. Those also are present. So it's not that everything is grim. I mean, there's also many, beautiful things that are happening, but I think it's important not to look at one without also looking at the other. It's necessary to really look at the whole picture, and then face the question objectively: what is our response to that? How do we live our life when faced with that complete set of facts, good, bad, and ugly, everything? So it seems like that's the essential question that spirituality is intended to address, right? But it's sort of first necessary to really see the entire situation, see it clearly, and then decide what our response to that is. Adyashanti was quite fond of saying the most important thing is to figure out what the most important thing is, right? What is the most important thing in our life, and how are we going to what's that response in and from us? What does that look like? So when I was in my 20s, this was after my childhood religion was no longer really a part of my life. It was before I discovered sort of the essence of spirituality. But at that time, my search was about, how do I make sense out of this life? Not as a philosophy, not looking for the right religion or attitude or, adventure or career but what is life really about? What would it need to look like to feel like it was fulfilled? So that's how I would have worded it in my 20s. And I was astonished to find out sometime in my 30s that it was actually what spirituality was about in essence, not as a philosophy, not as something to be believed, but actually the essence of the search was to find out what was living this life. What was it? What was it? So I thought I just came up with some broad categories of common responses to facing the situation that we find ourselves in, facing the whole of it, and then how do we respond? Okay, you could come up with other categories, but I think these are somewhat descriptive, and they'll tend to morph into one or another, and depending on circumstances, we may feel more one way and another way at another time. But anyway, so bear with me. Sort of 4 general, broad categories. We'll go through them relatively quickly. So the first one is, this is our response to life circumstances as we can see them objectively at this time. So the first one would be eat, drink, and be merry, right? Just basically enjoy the party as long as the party lasts. To look for the enjoyable aspects of life, try to maximize those, minimize the ones that aren't enjoyable. And I'm not just talking about, trying to relive our college years here. I'm using it in a much broader sense, where what this sort of category has as a characteristic is that it is about seeking self-pleasure, in however way we define it. It could be intoxicants, it could be wealth, it could be appearance, it could be security, it could be knowledge, it could be fame, respect. So it can also be played out in a constructive or a destructive way, right? And I would suggest a lot of our most functional people would fall into this category as I'm defining it. So, maybe we pick out a career that is satisfying. It enhances our sense of well-being to be operating in that field, to do it well, to have some degree of professional respect. It can be done in a lot of different avenues. But the commonality here is that, it is about increasing this sense of personal well-being, and it can even be, bleed into, socially, social services, but when we really look at that, many times it comes back to feeling good about myself because I'm, providing a service to those in need. So when we really look at this, we can group a whole area of activity that has to do with just increasing this sense of personal well-being as much as we can within this lifetime through adventures, accomplishments, all kinds of avenues. Okay. All right. So another possible response to looking at the life situation. By the way, this eat, drink, and be merry. None of these categories are wrong. right? And I would say they're all reasonable responses to the situation that we find ourselves in, you know, as a species, as a culture, and as individuals. So none of the, I'm not talking about any of these things as you know, a wrong take on life. I'm just saying that it's a limited take. All right, so another category would be anger, right? Just mad, you know, just, you know, other people, you know, if they could just get their act together, if they could just be more loving, more considerate, you know, they'd stop being so judgmental and blaming others, and, you know, if that political party would just, you know, wasn't so ignorant, and that corporation, you know, would stop selling harmful products, and et cetera, you know, then life would be okay. But in the meantime, I'm just mad about it. You know, and again, not an unreasonable response, right? You look around, there's plenty of reason to be mad. You know, to be outraged. No shortage of examples. Inhumanity. Maybe if that anger, you know, just perpetuates for too long, I mean, it can settle into depression, right? So this is sort of where the existentialists got to, right? They could see the issue clearly, you know, meaninglessness of life, right? But they stopped short. I mean, they saw the problem clearly, but they didn't see the resolution of the problem, you know. So that's what I mean by limited. So this anger, even though it is perhaps even justified and understandable, it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve any of these issues. It you know, hurts the person being angry as much as it energetically hurts everything around them. So it, you know, that anger, while justified, actually contributes to the division. So it's not ultimately helpful or fruitful, but it's not unjustified either. So, you know, there's a, you know, whole, you can look, you know, in the evening news, and there's a whole segment of the population that are firmly encamped in this category. Okay, the third category would be resignation, right? Seeing the issue and just feeling overwhelmed by it, right? So it's just too much. I mean, it's just me, you know, little me. What can I do about, you know, the problems of the world? You know, I'm not going to be able to solve climate change. I'm not going to, you know, be able to prevent, you know, who knows what governments, you know, altering biological organisms for the purpose of weapons. You know, I'm just, you know, I'll just resign myself to sort of doing the best I can, keeping my head down, not expecting too much from life, and just try to ride it out for the duration, you know. Again, not an unreasonable approach, right? Just make the best of it, you know, as long as it goes on. Just not expect too much from it, and I won't be too disappointed. You know, let other people deal with all of that, right? Resignation. Okay. Any of these ringing bells at all, either in oneself or people that we know? Okay, the fourth one might be a little surprising, and it's hard to give a title to it, but the one I've given to it is aspiring saint, right? These are, you know, religious people, spiritual people, you know, generally, you know, well-meaning people looking for a resolution to what they see in the world, in the culture, in their own individual life. All right? So these are people that, have spiritual practices and meditations and prayers and rituals and go on retreats and study groups and, have an active life. So I'm talking about people that take their religion or spirituality seriously, spend some time with it. And that movement feels like, we're on the path, right? It feels like we're going somewhere. We're sort of improving ourselves to sort of get above the fray and find some level of resolution, some level of peace and equanimity and perhaps bliss, which is what enlightenment promises, or, if you're of the more religious persuasion, it is, to earn your way into heaven, to be worthy of heavenly afterlife. So there's a motivation here, right? There's a goal, a hoped for payoff. At least I'll be happy. I won't be like all those other people that are just interested in the worldly things. I'm a spiritual person, and making progress. Yeah, I'm maybe not there yet, but I'm on the path, and my meditations are getting better, and I have some spiritual friends now, and I'm sort of familiar with the territory of spirituality and the metaphysics of it all. And we can say, well, I've had some spiritual experiences, some revelations. So it seems like I may not get there in this lifetime, but I'm working towards it in that direction. So this is actual sainthood is, sort of at the far end of that path, right? But the requirements for sainthood are pretty high level. It's basically to give oneself over to the will of God, the will of Allah, just one's entire being, whatever intruding thoughts are dismissed, and that is the entirety of one's life, right? There's a few people that accomplish that. There's Mother Teresa's and Saint Francis, and it's possible, right? But the demands for that path are exceptional, right? That level of personal will to go down that road to that extent, I would say would in many ways are more challenging than awakening. It's not necessarily the same thing, although it may look like that. But, when we look at something, if that is the imagined endpoint of that spiritual journey, how many of us really can sustain that level of will and self-denial just by, the sheer personal determination? I would suggest not many. So what remains for most spiritual seekers, religious persons, is sort of a modified regimen, right? Trying to be more patient, more loving, more compassionate, less judgmental, less likely to blame the other person. You know, we can try to do all of those things, right? And I'm sure we all have. But then where we get to is that personal sense of self comes into play. You know, so at some point, depending on the circumstances and how difficult the situation is, it's easy to put the blame over there. You know, say someone shouldn't have said that. Or to blame ourselves that we weren't up to some standard that we have. You know, so when we do that, you know, the extent to which we identify with being a spiritual person and then see that someone else falls short, and we direct our anger in that direction, then we're back in the anger camp, right? Or we see that where we fell short, and then, you know, we can easily fall into that resignation camp. Oh, I just can't do it, you know? Or, you know, we get caught up in spiritual pride, you know, thinking somehow we're more elevated than all of those other common people over there. Or may get caught up into us and them's trap. You know, my path is the true path, and that path over there, deluded, right? So there's a lot of possibilities on what appears to be the spiritual journey where we can get as lost as anywhere else. And so that's what I mean about this movement where we identify as spiritual people, not like those worldly people, but there are as many places to get lost in that territory as there is out in the world. Okay, so those are the four, what I'm characterizing as four common categories of the way to respond to this fundamental question about life. You know, what is an appropriate response from me given the circumstances that we find ourselves in as a species, as a planet, as a culture, and as an individual? Right? Big question. Okay, and then I promised an uncommon response, uncommon perspective. And that is a sustained, determined effort to find out what's true no matter what. No matter what the cost, no matter what ideas are at risk, no matter what the outcome, is to be willing to track that through in ourselves no matter what. And we may not even know how we got to that point, but there is a turning point where we're no longer willing to look to the outside for resolution of this question. We're no longer willing just to adopt a philosophy or religion or a theology or metaphysics or look to the next adventure or accomplishment or status out in the world. None of that works for us anymore. It's actually one of the benefits of living life fully and trying those things. You have a direct firsthand knowledge of there not being a final answer to be found there, right? If you've never done it, you think, well, maybe there is something still there. You know, if I was rich enough or famous enough or beautiful enough or adventurous enough, you know, maybe that would do it. Yeah. But when you've actually had that experience to whatever degree, you realize it's the payoff's just not there. Then we may be willing to come back and see if there's anything actually here. Here, before we went looking for it out there, I wonder if it's actually here. You know, so this is where the directive to look within comes from. You know, so when we talk about looking within, you know, if we imagine ourselves, let's say to be, you know, a castle, right, with a moat around the castle. You know, what we imagine ourselves to be is within that moat, inside the castle, we imagine that there are thoughts and feelings and this body-mind. That's what we imagine inside the moat. And then what we imagine outside the moat is God, somewhere out there. God, truth, source, whatever you want to call it. Somehow outside the moat, not here, but out there somewhere. But the reality, the already present reality is that source, truth, God, whatever you want to call it, is present inside the moat. And thoughts and feelings and experiences and memories and hopes and dreams are all outside the moat. So we have it just backwards. You know, but when we're looking for it outside of ourselves, we'll never find it out there. We'll never find anything ultimately satisfying out there, because that's not where it can be found. And we can look and look and look forever, and we still won't find it. So we won't find it in a set of philosophies, we won't find it in ideas, we won't find it in experiences, we won't find it even in highly desirable spiritual experiences. We won't find it in highly pleasurable experiences, no matter how frequent. Science won't give it to us. But where it is present is here as consciousness, as awareness. As improbable as that sounds, right? Not as a theory, but as our direct experience that is there for the noticing, really. It's not an attainment. It's not where we're going from what we are now to what we can become. It's really noticing what is already present there. Because we can notice, all of us, that this awareness is present. Yes? And everything that appears in our whole life appears within that awareness. It's the only place it appears. The awareness is the constant. The awareness, as we talked about earlier, is without form. It is formless. It's of a different dimension than everything else. This awareness isn't an attribute of a human. A human exists within this awareness. The awareness is primary. And when we sense into that, we can just notice it is its limitless character. It's not limited by anything in space. It's not limited by time. It's not limited by form. It's not limited by duration. It's not limited by anything. It's just aware of whatever appears within it. So it is aware of the most compelling spiritual experience we've ever had. It's also equally aware of when we're brushing our teeth in the morning. It's not a high state. It's not a state at all. States come and go. The awareness is present. It remains. So this is what, sages over the ages have been pointing to, that there is a possibility for resolution of life's biggest questions. And that's the invitation. It's not just to take it as a conceptual idea and try to use it for whatever purposes we think it'll give us. It's actually a pointer to look in a particular direction. And that's actually the only benefit of a teacher or a scripture is the degree to which it points in a fruitful direction, right? You still have to do the work. You still have to walk down that path yourself. Nobody else can do it for you. Not the greatest avatar in the world. Can't do it for you. They can point in the direction, but each of us have to follow that thread wherever it leads. Or not, right? We get to choose, right? And if we choose not to pursue that to that degree, to look what's fundamentally true about our existence, if we choose not to put in the effort that has the potential to resolve life's big issues, it's okay. It doesn't change anything. What we are is still what we are and what we always have been. So not finding that out for ourselves doesn't change anything fundamentally, other than the fact that you don't know that for yourself until one makes the effort to find out. Find out. That route to find out is eliminating everything that's not true. Not ultimately true. It may have some relative truth to it, but anything that's not ultimately true. And by ultimately true, I mean at all times, under all circumstances, for all people, in all dimensions. Is the one thing that's true, besides which everything else is less than true. So that's what I mean by it. So to come to that realization is really a matter of seeing the illusory nature of thoughts that we have picked up during our lifetime that aren't true, right? Thoughts about who we are and what the world is, and etc. So we don't have to attain that truth. That truth is already present. The only difference is some people know it, some people don't. It's the only difference. So there's no actual ultimate downside here. You are what you are, what you have always been, inseparable from Source. Not subject to birth and death. Pristine. The human thing is conditioned, no doubt, all of us. But what we essentially are is not conditioned. Can't be conditioned. So the journey, the possibility, the invitation is really to realize that for ourselves, where we can recognize that what we're looking for isn't out there somewhere, out there beyond us, but it is actually what's looking. And that's why it's so well hidden, right? It's the last place we'll ever think to look, It's so close to home that we don't even realize that it's there. So it's really coming back and being willing to see what is already there in our most essential being, as intimate as it can possibly be, is what we are already. Formless, infinite awareness. As improbable as that sounds.